Oh, we are live.
We are live. We were all staring at the screen, hoping something would come up. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening and watching our first online encore for Symphony Nova Scotia. And personally, I'm just stoked that it was with these two wonderful women, Laura and Rebecca, and the piece we did together this season. Laura, who's on the left of my screen, I don't know how it is for everyone else, was the composer, and Rebecca wrote the text and performed it live with me on stage in what's probably one of the weirdest concerto situations I've ever had, spoken voice. Is it the first time you've performed with music, Rebecca, or is it something you do?
It's not something that I do often. The first time I actually did any kind of live performance with music was with Zara Choral Theater. So they're a group of female singers, and they had this production called Fatty Legs, where it was based off of Margaret Polkiak's book, Fatty Legs, and it was her story of going to residential school in the north. So she went to residential school in Aklavik, and originally her family was inside the Arctic Circle. And so they had these beautiful pieces, and I would perform as Margaret, while Serene Fox, who is an Anishinaabe dancer, would dance as Margaret. And so there was a choral theater and choreography and conductor, and I had no experience working with music before, and so I worked out some really good signals with the conductor, and it was a 45-minute show of like dramatic performing of playing her when she wants to go to residential school, when she has her hair cut, when she's hit by the nuns, when she goes back home for the first time, all with this kind of beautiful music in the background. So it was definitely my first introduction, and it made me really excited to do this stuff with Symphony Nova Scotia.
Yeah, it worked really well, I thought. Laura, had you written for like vocal writing, for sung voice? Was this the first time you'd written for speech?
I had done some work actually with rap artists and orchestra. Nothing that was ever performed. This is back in my U of T days. So part of my master's degree thesis, actually, one of the movements was all the movements were for spoken voice, and it was pre-recorded voices with orchestra. So, I mean, I never got to hear that with a live orchestra, but I've always been interested in that. So when this project came to me, it was a perfect match, and I was very excited about it.
It worked really, really well, I thought.
Yeah.
And did you two know each other before we did it?
Definitely no.
So how did this duo end up happening? Was that a Nova Scotia hookup or Symphony Nova Scotia?
So this is it's a co-commission with the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony and Symphony Nova Scotia. So I was notified from Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony that Rebecca Thomas chose me from a short list of composers, and asking if I was interested in composing this piece with her as the poet narrator. This was my first commission with a symphony orchestra, so it was extremely exciting, and the fact that it was a co-commission and that I had the opportunity to hear it with two orchestras was even better. So that was back in December 2017. And so immediately I was in touch with Rebecca, and we kind of chatted about what the piece would be. She gave me her vision of the three movements, and I got to work. We went back and forth. I sent her kind of clips of what I was thinking for each movement. She told me yay or nay. And yeah, it was back and forth, I'd say, from April till October of 2018. So
yeah, and like that was a really difficult position I found to be in, because I'm not musically trained. I know like 10 chords on the guitar, and my fingering of that is terrible. Like I don't consider myself a musical person. So to have to sit down with somebody who has like the way like you understand music, Laura, I find to be so like it's like trying to fly for me. Like it's just impossible. Like I don't understand how you can understand that, right? And so to have to lead that, saying like, I want it to feel like this, I want it to evoke this kind of emotion, and to have the gall, I would say, or the audacity to tell you, I don't like that. That a very strange position to find myself in, but you were so supportive and you were so encouraging, and you were really good at prompting those sorts of directions, because you said like, do you want it to be aggressive? How do you want it to feel? Like, and I found that to be really helpful in helping you conceptualize music.
And then Laura, how do you then take those sorts of non-musical words or extra musical words and go, then technically the craft to make that, to manufacture that emotion is, do you think of it that way as quite a...
Yeah, I don't find it all that difficult, actually. I love the direction. In fact, for each movement, I asked Rebecca just to give me a few keywords, and that really helped me kind of find the sound. I guess because I've done some work in film before, that I had to, work with directors who were not musicians. So they'd give me their vision of it. And of course, no musical terms were included, but I kind of had to pick that apart and, figure out what they meant and translate that to music. So I had some practice with that, but yeah, Rebecca was amazing to work with, very, very easy to work with. And as you say, you couldn't do what I do. I could never do what you did. And do what you do. I find it unbelievable. And
absolutely anyone could do what I do. I just stand at the front waving my arms and looking lost for the moment. Okay, so feel free to butt in and ask each other questions, but I'm going to keep it rolling until we start getting some questions on the chat.
Sure.
Rebecca, we were talking about this just before we went live. When I read the poems just as poems and forget that they're part of a musical piece, I still have such a strong sense of pulse and phrase in them. And I don't know whether it's because you tend to, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm a total layperson here, vary phrase lengths and line lengths and meters and things. So there's a lot of sort of polyrhythmic elements to it. It never gets into a canter that stays the same the whole way through. Is it something you think about when you're writing, that very auditory musical element of the words? Or
I think so. Not necessarily in like the musicality of it, but more so like how it's going to sound spoken out loud, because I started performing poetry. I'm not necessarily like a page poet, like writing poetry meant for reading. A lot of it is meant to be spoken out loud, and I like the idea of building a tension with how I speak, right? So like kind of have this, I joke that I have this formula where it's like really intense one-liner to bring you into it, and then to like work you up to a climax, and then like end with a pithy like kind of moral of the story ending. But I like the fact that I want to be able to play with emotion. I want to be able to kind of catch people off guard. Like I think of it maybe like a movie or a television show, right? Like you want to kind of build that climax and then have a conclusion that's satisfactory to both like feeling and hearing. But the first poet that I really listened to a lot, who is a spoken word poet, is Shane Koizan, and he's an Indigenous poet from the North, and he has a very kind of musical style, and he has a band. It's like Shane Koizan and the Short Story Long, where he does poetry with music as well. And that was I can hear how I have I started imitating his style first before I started kind of creating my own style. So I definitely had a good like musical base when I started learning and practicing and speaking out loud.
Laura, do you have a composition mentor or someone like that you loved their style when you first encountered it, and you see traces of it in your own work still?
Yeah, I have to say that my professor through all of my studies at the University of Toronto, which was 10 years, Christos Hatsis, Canadian composer. I was first introduced to his music when another Toronto group, the Griffin Trio, actually came to our high school, and they played a few pieces, and they didn't introduce them till after. So I heard this piece, and it was almost exactly how I wanted to sound and how I wanted to write, and it blew me away. And then I realized, okay, he teaches at the U of T. I live in Toronto. I'm going to be going to university in a couple of years. And I was so fortunate to work with him. And I definitely hear traces of his music in my music. And vice versa, I think, a little bit. So
Oh.
When did you start playing music and composing? Like, sorry, I'm curious now.
oh, sure. So when I was maybe 3, I had a little toy piano, and my parents, I would play any kind of music that I heard around the house, songs that my parents would play, nursery rhymes, whatever. And they were, you know, neither of them are musicians. So they thought, how can she do that? She's just picking up these songs. So anyway, they enrolled me in music lessons. Turns out I had perfect pitch, which
so
helped
cool.
a lot. Yeah. So that kind of, it started from a very young age. So maybe 3.5, 4, I was writing original little tunes. I went to Yamaha Music School, which encouraged creativity and composition, and had these programs where you'd create original compositions. And I had the opportunity to perform them actually all around the world at a young age. So wow. This was on an instrument at the time called the electone. It's an electronic organ. Definitely doesn't exist anymore, but you had your right hand, your left hand, and your pedal. You had both feet doing different things on the pedals. So pretty much you could sound like a whole band or orchestra just on this instrument. So I started writing on that instrument when I was 8. And that was kind of my first introduction to writing for the orchestra, I guess you could say, although it was all electronic.
That's bananas. Like that's so
intimidating. I've been doing it for a long time. It's been a passion of mine and a dream of mine from a very, very young age. So yeah.
Do you still have one of these crazy instruments in your house?
It's in my parents' house. Yeah.
I think we need some video footage.
But it's hilarious. You programmed all your sounds onto a floppy disk, and
floppy disk. My goodness, that goes back.
Yeah. So definitely an ancient instrument now, but it was great for my creativity as a child. So.
Absolutely.
Your parents have to promise, if they're watching, do not throw that instrument out ever. Right. It sounds absolutely epic, and I think we should commission something for it.
Yeah, right.
100%. I'll write some poetry to go along with this thing for sure.
For sure.
Amazing.
So one of the other things we were talking about while we were sitting in the background, while everyone else was getting to watch the video, which we didn't get to watch, was what it's like as people who make our living at least partially by doing creative things, making things or performing things or whatever, what it's like being in lockdown. And I know for myself as a conductor, even though I sort of started and a lot of my friends were like, gosh, we're going to be in lockdown. There's so much time to learn music, and it's such a blessing because we're normally just skating around the world and slightly skimming over the surface at time and hoping no one notices because we just don't have time. I haven't opened a single score, not once. I've done jigsaws, I've done baking, I've done gardening, but I just cannot open any music for some reason. And I'm wondering if it's the same as the people on the other side of it, the creators, if you're having a similar thing or actually full of inspiration, or what's it like?
I'll let you, Laura, you take it.
Okay. Well, I mean, my situation right now, I have a 1-year-old child. So with my husband working at home, and he's actually working, he's up early and he's in front of the computer. And I mean, I can't bother him to look after our baby. So it's busy. It's hard. And it's hard to be creative when you have someone nagging at your legs all the time. But
I'm sure that's the case even outside of lockdown, though, to have a new baby and be trying to do your own creative work.
It is, hard. But I was fortunate enough to have my mom, who would come over and babysit so I could get some work done, my husband's mom, and just help a little bit. But now nobody's coming over. It's just us, and it's hard. So I've made a resolution. It's already been a couple months, and, the baby's sleeping through the night. I'm getting, for the most part, restful sleeps. I can start waking up early and get some work done before the baby wakes up. So it would be completely different if I didn't have a child, but this is life right now. So yeah. And quarantine isn't easy. As a composer, it's hard to find that inspiration when you're literally locked inside the house. There's really nowhere to go. It's difficult. I would find inspiration pretty much anywhere but home before. It's difficult. Definitely really hard for everyone. What about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, like I think writing has definitely been tough for this past little while. I also work like a full-time job. I'm a senior consultant for diversity and inclusion for the province of Nova Scotia. So like we're working with like the departments on like their D&I planning, and like that's a 40-hour a week job, and I'm doing that from home as well. And I used to find like a lot of kind of like a reprieve from that kind of work in my poetry, because a lot of the things, like when you are coming from an equity seeking community and you are trying to change government that made us equity seeking in the first place, right? That kind of, there's a lot of emotion there, and you want to be able to sometimes say how you're really feeling, like really emotionally, but you know that that's not necessarily going to be productive, or is it seen as professional, or is it, all those sorts of things. So I used to take that to my writing, because I could say all of those things and I could, put all those emotions in there. But I found that I was being really just tired and burnt out, and that writing felt like work. Ugh, like I have to go home and work now. Like I don't want to go home. I just worked. I don't want to work again. But I've been finding, at least with this quarantine, everyone's in their own house, that I have a little bit of moments of those breaks, because, if the laundry dings, like I get to get up from my desk and go change over the laundry. And like when you're at work, there's that expectation that, you're constantly working when you're at your desk. And so I found that my creativity has been creeping in a little bit. So I went home for Mother's Day, and then like another poem. I'm trying hard to write poems about like vulnerability, which I'm not good at. Like I can be like political stand poems, but like poems about like love, I feel incredibly embarrassed to write about. So I'm like leaning into those uncomfortable emotions, because there's no pressure to perform it. There's nobody there. So I'll like put something out on Instagram, or I'll tweet something, right? And then I have the ability to like delete it if I kind of feel that way. So dipping my toe back into it now that I'm not feeling so much like pressure all the time.
I think that's a really interesting aspect of your writing, that it has this, at its very core, it has a public face to it, that you're going to speak it, or so yeah, it's already slightly removed from you in some way. Not removed from you, but yeah, has a public interface in a way that a lot of poetry, I'm guessing, doesn't.
Yeah, I have a book of poetry coming out in the fall, and I got like the structural edit of like, this is what I think my editor's saying, like, these are the poems that I think should be in it. These are the themes that we're going to group together, and here you go. And so there's 3 sections, and the first section is about love. And there's a couple of poems in there. It's not about the love of my grandfather, and the love of my mother, and the love of my family, and the love of my culture, but like kind of like a romantic love. There's like 2 poems in there about romantic love, and I was reading it and I was like, I am like just mortified that I don't know. There's this like, it was just so funny, because so many pieces of art are so focused on romantic love in that way, and it's just, to me, it's like a level of vulnerability that has me super freaked out to put out in the world. But well, I mean, I think it's important that it's there. It's interesting.
Now that you've been doing what you do you did start quite late, didn't you? Getting into poetry, like it wasn't something you'd been doing since you were 3.5, obviously. But are you finding, because it seems to me that so much of your work does have a political side to it, and a kind of what you were saying earlier about that slight manipulation in a good way of the audience, of I'm going to grab you and then tickle you and then push you away and then kiss you on the cheek, and there's all these ways that as a listener or a reader you feel sort of caught up in it and swept around in it, and then put down, and you finish reading it or hearing it having experienced something. It's not just that you've read it and contemplated it. Do you think that's something that is always going to be, I suppose that's an impossible thing to answer, but do you feel that type of energy in your poetry was raging when you started, and it's starting to shift? Or
I think a little bit. I think so. Like one thing that I learned, I think, at a young age, I'm not like a musical savant like Laura, but one thing I learned as a kid is that I know that I can hold attention. Like I know that I can command an audience. Like I know I have that sense of gravitas. And then for me, growing up off reserve, growing up disconnected from community for a long time because of how my dad was. And for me, it was less about I have a burning desire to write and perform, but more so I have this piece, or I have this thing about me, and I have a problem that I want to solve, and they go together so well. And poetry happened to be, and performance happened to be a way that I was able to like put that out there and to be able to bring that cause forward, and then to endear people to me in a way where then I can challenge them but still maintain that relationship. And I think that that is something that's really like unique, that I'm able to do, that I can kind of push you but still maintain like a positive connection.
I'm mindful that we've not had any questions from anyone online, and so I'm curious at this point to know if anyone who's watching or listening has any questions, even someone who played in the premiere. If you want to tell us what it was like to play for spoken voice instead of an instrument or a singer, or as an audience member, how you were left feeling during or after the performance, because there are definitely challenging themes in there for the European immigrant community, or the colonial community, and I think it's always interesting. Like we talked about it when we were doing that. I come from New Zealand. We have the Māori community, and my ancestors came just in the 19th century from Scotland and England, and there's been a really long process for about 40 years of treaty acknowledgement and settlement and trying to put things right. And there's just in the last 5-10 years been this amazing renaissance of te reo Māori language, which is now taught at all schools. Every kid in the country learns it. My mum, who's in her 70s, is learning it, so that she can talk to her grandchildren who are all as white and blonde as I am. So it's been a really joyful awakening of, do you know what, this thing we've got in our country is incredible. It's so unique, and it's with the benefit of a bit of distance now, and even more distance in Canada, it's part of all of our stories, and all of it is part of the story. The good bits, the horrible bits, the icky bits, the bits we weren't taught at school that we're only learning now. Those are great bits. We need to know those bits. They're part of all of our stories. And I don't know, I'm just interested to know, I suppose since I've been through that as a New Zealander, I'm interested to know what it's like for Canadians to be going through that similar process now, and how it feels, and how amazing it is to have a work of art addressing it, and as sort of dipping your toe in the water of it, because it is a loving way to bring up those kind of conversations, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's a really generous, spirited way to have those conversations.
You have to
No, you go.
Say, like, you have to have hard conversations with the people you love, right? Like, I'm trying to think, like Mi'kmaq, like the Mi'kmaq is actually like a misnomer. Actually, when settlers came and they asked, like, who's this? The word is Mi'kmaq with an M, with an N, instead of an M, which means like family. And so this notion, like right from the get-go, like we as Mi'kmaq people, like identified as like family, like a grouping of people, and very welcoming of people, but at the same time, like not to be pushed over, and like those sorts of things. And like you have, and people came to live with us, and they became like Mi'kmaq because they lived as Mi'kmaq people, right? And so I think, having those tough conversations with the people you love, like I'm a product of colonization. Like my mom is of Scottish descent. Like my grandfather was the son of a Scottish immigrant, and then my dad here is this full-blooded Mi'kmaq man who went to residential school. If I wouldn't exist if colonization didn't happen, but at the same time, even though I am, half, I still overwhelmingly was on the disadvantaged side, right? And so you want to have those conversations, because it's like, I don't expect Canadians who aren't Indigenous to up and leave. Like, I don't expect that to happen, but I expect that, you know, like your family that you have tough conversations with, you do the best to maintain those ties, right? And there's that kind of that obligation to maintain those ties and to have those difficult conversations with your family members so that you can be a better family, right? And
yeah, definitely.
And that's how I see it, at least anyway.
Yeah, and it's having a curiosity about it as well, that it's some of them will be difficult conversations, some of them will be really enlightening conversations and surprising conversations, and just being curious about it. We have had a question through from Symphony Nova Scotia stalwart, Daniel Bartholomew Poyser, who is one of the conductors, who I've spoken to by email but never actually met, which really sucks. But he says, what is it like to conduct a spoken word soloist versus an instrumental soloist? And that was, I remember we had to talk about this, first of all, Laura, when you sent the score, and I remember being really naively anxious and going, Laura, I don't know, when does she speak, and do I cue her? Does she have a score? Do I need to sit and wait and that until she said the thing? Because of course spoken word isn't regularly pulsed in the way that a musical part is, but so I had little bits in the score where Laura put a little number or an asterisk and said, okay, this will be Q5. And we had moments, didn't we, Rebecca, of, okay, I'll definitely look at you and give you that one. But then some of it, you didn't need any cueing.
That's all I need.
And it's so funny as a conductor because it's not, you know, cueing to behind you in that way. It's not something I was used to. And I was more nervous about that in the performance. It's like, oh, I really hope I don't screw it up and forget to cue you for something. But I think it all worked perfectly. If I remember in the performance, actually, it all just sat really nicely, which was great. And actually, Laura, you'd written it so sensitively and logically that there was this just cruises underneath for a little bit of time. And when you hear these three words come up and, you know, resume active duty as an orchestra.
Exactly. And it also allowed Rebecca to take her time and to be expressive in the moment and not to worry about, the music's, I'm running out of time. Well, I hope you didn't feel like that at least, but tried to make it so that she could be free with her spoken word.
I appreciate it. I really do, because when I did the piece with Fatty Legs, like, again, like that eye contact was like what I'd worked out with the conductor, and there was this really emotional part of the performance where I'm crying, I got tears and snot, and it's like a whole thing. And she looked at me because the way, like, because every performance is a little bit different. Sometimes you're more emotional, sometimes you're not. And I was really emotional in this performance. And she looked at me more as a concern, like, are you okay? Take all the time you need. But I saw that as like, next line. So I was like, okay. So like having that, like that running sound underneath that's like, I can keep going, I can take a moment, like, was such an intuitive built-in. And so like, I appreciate that you anticipated that. And I thought that was so great.
Yeah, it worked really well. Well, I think it's almost time to wrap up. So, and it's also my bedtime. Over here in Scotland, it's past midnight now.
Oh, wow.
Amazingly, I'm not wearing my pajamas, which I could have. This is the brilliant thing about living life on Zoom. You can just leave your pajamas on the whole time. But I was very good, and I even have shoes on, which is pretty good effort for lockdown, I think. So thank you so much, you two, for resuming our little trio that we enjoyed so much last year, and for everything you brought into the room with the orchestra. It was just, for all of us, it was such a pleasure to work with you and to witness your working. And I think I mentioned on Twitter, it was like, I don't think I've ever witnessed that kind of jaw on the floor silence from an audience at the end of it, and like everyone stood up. It was such a powerful and emotive response to the piece, which was, I felt very privileged to be able to bring your work to Halifax in that way and to our audience. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to everyone from the orchestra, the players. I hope you enjoyed getting to watch yourselves on TV. And also to audience members and people from around the world who have tuned in to hear the piece and hear the orchestra and meet these two amazing human beings and witness me picking their brains. So thank you very much. And I hope you guys keep doing what you're doing, and I hope we all collaborate again at some point soon.
Thank you so much, Holly. Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.